Are you interested in playing around with Kafka? I am, so I'm going to walk through setting up Zookeeper and Kafka using Docker. Then I'm going to create a simple console app using the official Kafka NuGet package to create a consumer and producer. Hey everybody, it's Derek Martin from CodeOpinion.com. If you're new to my channel, I post videos about software architecture and design in .NET, so if you're interested in those topics, make sure to subscribe. All right, the first thing I need to do is actually get Zookeeper set up, and Zookeeper is needed to run Kafka because it is ultimately what is used for Kafka to keep track of consumers and brokers. So I'm going to be using Docker, so I'm on the Zookeeper page here on Docker Hub, and I'm just going to jump over to terminal, and I'm just going to Docker pull this latest. All right, now that's done. I also need to pull the latest image for Kafka, so let's do that. So here's the Docker Hub page. I'm just going to copy the Docker pull. All right, so now that I have both images downloaded, what I'm going to do is actually create a network that I'm going to use for both containers of Zookeeper and Kafka. So let's do that. All right, so let's create a new Zookeeper container. Pretty much the entire Docker command, that Docker run command I'm using here, is from their getting started guide. So it looks like this. So the network is going to be the Kafka one that I just created. We'll just give it a name of Zookeeper. So this is kind of a standard port 2181. And then I'm just going to bind 2181 to my Docker host from that container. And then what I can do is run a Docker logs on Zookeeper to see that's running. And we can see that it's binding to 2181. All right, so now we can create the Kafka container. Going to again use the same network. And then I'm going to bind 9092 because so what I'm doing here is I'm providing the environment variable to say that Zookeeper was running on 2181 that we defined earlier. And like I said, for 9092, because there's another environment variable that we're going to tell our listeners for Kafka here. So there's localhost 9092. All right, now that we have it running, do the same thing. We can see do Docker logs. And we are basically running and connecting to Zookeeper. All right, so now that we have Zookeeper and Kafka running, first thing I'm going to do is I created a blank .NET new console app. So I'm going to take the Confluent Kafka NuGet package, and I'll jump over to Writer. And I'm just going to add this to the project. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use kind of the generic host to basically configure both a consumer and a producer. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually create our producer that's going to be basically publishing messages. So before I even get there, I'm going to use the generic host, which is going to require me to also need another package. basics is what I'm going to use. All right. So now let's create our producer generic host. I should say our hosted service that's going to live in the generic host. All right, so we got to implement this. So basically I'm taking pretty much kind of the starter sample, modified a little bit here. So I'm actually going to create a constructor, and I'm going to take the logger just so we can log what we're doing here. And now I'm actually going to create the producer itself. So to do that, we need to create our producer config. And this is ultimately where we're just specifying where our bootstrap servers are. And that is going to be on localhost 9092, which is what we configured when we were setting up our containers. So our producer builder takes two type parameters. The first one's going to be null from their particular type here. The second one is going to be a string, and I'm going to pass this config. All right, so there's our producer. Then what I'm going to do for kind of demo here is I'm going to let's just iterate. Let's say it'll do 100 times. And then I'm going to log kind of a hello world message, hence the string as the second parameter. Now I'm actually going to use the producer to actually send that message. So that's going to look like this. And this is going to be the first thing we're going to have to specify is the topic. I've already created a topic called demo. I'll show that in a minute. And here's where we're actually going to create our new message of type null string. So here I'm actually just going to specify the value, which is going to be from our type parameter, which is string, and I'm just going to use our value that we're also logging. And since I have a cancellation token, I can also pass that along the way. All right. And do flush. Make sure everything it gets delivered. And then in our stop async, just because this is our hosted service, I can dispose the producer. All right, so now we have our hosted service where I've just kind of created the basics of a producer, and I'm producing a message that's going to have hello world and then our incrementing number. All right, so lastly, like I mentioned, I'm going to use a generic host. I need to wire that up. So let's create a So it's going to be our host builder. So configure services, where we're going to add our hosted service. then from here, now that we're creating our host, let's just run it. All right, there we go. All right, so let's give this a run and we'll take out the messages, look at the messages it's producing. So there we go, from 0 to 99. Now what I can do is I've downloaded an app called Conductor. This is where it's just a visual way of looking at a UI of Kafka. So if I go under topics, this is where I've actually created that demo topic beforehand. So if I look at the topic and I look at the stream here, you can see this is right now, Hello World 99, and everything we've basically been producing. All right, so for a consumer, what I'm gonna do is show a completely different library than the official, because I last week noticed this tweet from Ian Cooper, and Scott Hunter replied asking what package he was using for Kafka, and because they have a customer that is using this particular package, this Kafka Sharp. So here's the GitHub, and what I'm going to use this package as the actual consumer. All right, so let's add the package reference to Kafka Sharp, and then I'm going to jump back over to the CS proj, and I'm going to add a new hosted service, but this is going to be actually our consumer. Pretty much going to do the exact same type of thing. Is I will create the client, and then in the start I'll actually just consume messages, and in the stop I'll just dispose of the client. So let's first create the client. So we create a cluster client. This requires a configuration, just like we were doing with our producer, to where our 9092 instance is. And then we got to provide a logger, so I'll just use the console logger. All right, so there's our cluster. Before I forget, I will dispose of it. And then in our start async is where we're actually going to start consuming messages. So let's just do consume from the latest, and we got to provide the topic, which when I was producing, I was using demo, so I'll just use the same one. And then here I can specify a message received. And then record is going to be the actual Kafka record. So at this point, I'll just log what's actually coming back. This one, from what I'm aware of, doesn't actually do any of the deserialization for you. So it's just going to come in as a byte array, versus the other package I was using does the serialization for you. So this is one's a little bit more lightweight, hence why it's more performant. And like I said, the record, there's going to be record.value, and it says object, but it's actually a byte array. So what I'll do here is I'll just cast this as byte. All right, so let's give this a run. What I'm actually going to do before that is we will add our consumer. All right, so we'll run this. We'll actually see the consumer pick up. So there's publishing everything, and then we just received all the messages. So we initially published. Let's go up even farther. So these are publishing. And then subsequently, here's our message for receiving. I can also take our conductor UI again, and let's go to the demo topic, and I'll just produce one from here actually. Make this a little bit smaller. And we'll be able to see in the logs it's actually. So let's add. And when I send this off, there was our received hello world as I sent that from conductor. So if you're using Kafka, let me know in the comments. I'd be curious to know if you're using it alongside some kind of command dispatcher or event dispatcher like Brighter or the project I reviewed a few months ago called CAP. Let me know in the comments if you're using dispatcher with it or if you're just using the libraries directly like I was using right now. Thanks. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And please subscribe for more software architecture related videos.